Thanks for watching Afternoon Live. They've been associated with witches and vampires and blamed for spreading disease. But our next guest is hoping to demystify these misunderstood creatures and show how amazing and necessary they really are. We welcome the author of The Weird and Wonderful World of Bats, biologist and ecologist Alyson Brokaw. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
What first drew you to bats? Because I know you are quite the enthusiast. You know just about everything there is to know about bats.
Well, I'm not sure I would say that, but thank you. I grew up in sort of a rural area surrounded by fields and forests, and I kind of always knew that I loved animals and I wanted to study animals. And we used to see bats flying around the fields and forests near where I grew up every night, especially in the summertime. And every night, if we were outside, one of my parents would sort of point and be like, "Look, here's Mrs. Bat." So I just kind of grew up with a love of these creatures. And then as I got older and started learning more about them, I realized how much there was still to learn about them and have been fascinated ever since.
Yeah, do you think that people maybe not having the experience of maybe seeing bats all that often or interacting with them kind of can lead to some misconceptions about, because they really are so important to the human species?
Yeah, I think humans, we are sort of hardwired to be afraid of things that we don't understand, which can be very helpful sometimes. And in the case of bats, most people have probably never had the reason or the opportunity to see a bat up close. Most of us are probably only seeing them flying around at night, if at all, or seeing potentially, horror movie, fictional versions of bats. So I think a lot of it just comes down to not understanding bats. And so that's something that I try really hard to do, is just show people that bats are just these cool animals just out there living their lives like the rest of us, and that they do play really important roles in our ecosystems.
Yeah, what are some of the things that make bats special and unique, specifically among other mammals?
Yeah, so bats are the only mammals capable of true flight. So that's the big one. And that ability to fly has really helped them become really diverse. So there are over 1,400 species of bat on this planet that we currently have described. I'm sure that number is going to go up by next year because we are always learning more about these creatures. They are found everywhere on the world. Pretty much if you go somewhere, whether it's a remote island or all these different places, chances are there's going to be at least one bat that lives there.
Well, and the way they use echolocation, does that differ from other animals that use that same kind of way to navigate?
Yeah, so bats are really sophisticated in their use of echolocation. So other animals do use echolocation, which is using sound to navigate, relying on the echoes that come back. Things like dolphins and even some birds and some other mammals. But a lot of those animals are using what we would refer to as click echolocation. So they're making clicking noises with their tongues, and they can get a lot of information from that sound. But most bats are using their larynx, so their voice box, to make the sounds, and that gives them a ton of flexibility in the frequencies, the pitches of sounds that they can use, and the shape of those sounds, which all help them be really specific in exactly what it is they're trying to detect, whether it's fruit trees in a forest or a very tiny insect flying by.
That's so cool. Well, and you mentioned the fruit trees. Do they have a special sense of smell as well?
Yeah, so we frequently think of bats as only really using sound, but they are using other senses as well. So my research background was actually in understanding how fruit bats use their sense of smell to find and evaluate food. So we know that they can discriminate ripe and unripe fruit using their sense of smell. They also make choices about their preferences for food based on smell, kind of like humans do.
That's so cool. Okay, and what about their immune systems and longevity? Because I'm understanding some of your study of bats might help us understand a little bit more about humans as well.
Yeah, Yeah, so because bats are mammals like humans, they have a lot of similarities in the way that their cells function and their sort of basic physiology. And when it comes to things like longevity and how long bats live, uh, of the 19 species of mammals that live longer than humans relative to body size, 18 of them are a type of bat. So the idea is that if we can look at the DNA of these bats, look at what their cells are doing that make them so good at living longer, at having these really great immune systems, at minimizing inflammation, we can apply those mechanisms to things like, human drugs.
That's so fascinating. So I want to ask you about this disease, white nose syndrome. That's impacting bats specifically in North America. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so white nose syndrome is a fungal disease. It's caused by this fungus that lives in the caves and soils where bats hibernate. So only hibernating species have been severely impacted by white nose syndrome. And when they're hibernating, this fungus comes in, it grows over their noses, their ears, their wings, um, hence the name white nose syndrome. And what it does is it actually causes them to wake up from hibernation more frequently than they normally would. And as a result, they burn through all the energy that they've saved to get through the winter. They burn through it much faster. And so that results in them waking up sooner. They don't have as much fat reserves to get them through the sort of early spring. And so they essentially starve.
That is really sad when you kind of break it all down like that. Is there anything that humans can do to help either with this specifically or just larger conservation efforts for bats?
Yeah, so with white nose syndrome in particular, one thing, if people are into recreational caving or like exploring caves, which are really fun, one thing is to minimize disturbance, so not bothering bats when they're hibernating, making sure to clean gear thoroughly, especially if you're moving between caves. And then more generally, I always like to advocate for just if we can support native, healthy ecosystems, that's going to help the bats and other animals that are using that space. So having native plants in your garden, minimizing pesticide use, keeping your pets indoors, all those kinds of things that are going to protect lots of different wildlife, including bats.
Hey, we've learned a lot of great stuff today. I know we're just scratching the surface. So thank you so much for spending some time with us and congratulations on your book.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you.
Of course. Okay, here's Alyson's book again. It's The Weird and Wonderful World of Bats, and we'll have more information on our website at katu.com. We'll be right back with more Afternoon Live right after this.